The November morning in downtown Denver was crisp, with autumn leaves scattered across 17th Street like golden confetti. The annual Veterans Day Parade was set to begin in 30 minutes, and crowds were already gathering along the sidewalks, their breath visible in small puffs as they chatted excitedly about honoring the nation's heroes. Sarah Martinez clutched her eviction notice with trembling hands. The paper crumpled from being folded and unfolded countless times over the past 3 days. Her 8-year-old son Tommy stood beside her, his Spider-Man backpack slung over his shoulders, unaware that they had nowhere to go after school today. The apartment they'd called home for 2 years was no longer theirs. The final notice was clear: vacate by noon today. "Mom, why are we standing here? Shouldn't we be packing?" Tommy asked, his innocent brown eyes reflecting confusion as he watched the parade preparations around them. Sarah's heart clenched. How could she explain to her son that everything they owned fit into 2 duffel bags sitting in her beat-up Honda Civic, which was currently running on fumes and prayers? The medical bills from Tommy's asthma treatments had drained their savings, and her part-time job at the local diner barely covered groceries, let alone rent. The sound of marching bands tuning their instruments echoed from the staging area 3 blocks away. Police officers were setting up barriers and vendors were preparing their hot chocolate stands. Everything seemed so normal, so celebratory, while Sarah's world was crumbling around her. I need a moment to think, sweetheart," she whispered, pulling Tommy closer as a cold wind whipped through the street. She watched a group of veterans in their dress uniforms adjusting their medals and straightening their formation. These were the people everyone came to honor, heroes who had sacrificed so much for their country. And here she was, a veteran herself who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan as a combat medic, standing on the sidelines with nowhere to go. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had saved lives in Kandahar, had earned commendations for her service, but somehow couldn't save her own small family from homelessness. The transition back to civilian life had been harder than anyone had prepared her for. The nightmares, the hypervigilance, the struggle to find stable employment that accommodated her PTSD episodes, it had all led to this moment. "Look, Mom, look at all the soldiers." Tommy pointed excitedly as the first formation began marching down the street, their boots striking the pavement in perfect synchronization. Sarah's chest tightened as she recognized the 4th Infantry Division patch on their uniforms, the same division she had served with. The familiar sight brought back a flood of memories, the camaraderie, the sense of purpose, the feeling of being part of something bigger than herself. She remembered how her unit had been like a family, how they'd looked out for each other no matter what. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause as the parade officially began. American flags waved proudly, children sat on their fathers' shoulders, and grateful civilians shouted, "Thank you for your service," to the passing soldiers. But Sarah felt invisible, forgotten. The very people she had served alongside were marching past while she stood there, homeless and desperate, with her son's future hanging in the balance. As the next formation approached, a group of younger soldiers, probably fresh from deployment, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She couldn't stand on the sidelines anymore, watching life pass her by while she and Tommy suffered in silence. With trembling legs and her heart pounding against her ribs, Sarah stepped off the curb and into the street, directly into the path of the approaching military formation. The crowd's cheers suddenly died down to confused murmurs as people noticed the woman with the small boy standing in the middle of 17th Street. Sarah Martinez found herself facing 30 uniformed soldiers, their marching temporarily halted as they maintained formation just 10 feet away from her. Staff Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez, leading the formation, raised his hand to signal a pause. At 32, he was a career soldier with 3 deployments under his belt, but nothing in his training had prepared him for this moment. The woman standing before them wasn't some protester or attention seeker. Her posture, despite her obvious distress, carried the unmistakable bearing of a fellow service member. "Ma'am, you need to return to the sidewalk," Sergeant Rodriguez called out, his voice firm but not unkind. "The parade needs to continue." Sarah's voice cracked as she tried to speak. Tommy pressed closer to her side, sensing his mother's distress, even if he didn't understand it. Around them, hundreds of spectators had gone quiet. Phone cameras now focused on the unexpected scene unfolding in the middle of the Veterans Day Parade. I served too, Sarah finally managed to say, her voice barely audible above the wind. I was a combat medic with the 4th Infantry Division. 2 tours in Afghanistan. The words hung in the cold Denver air like a confession. Several soldiers in the formation exchanged glances. They recognized the pain in her voice, the way her shoulders carried an invisible weight that only fellow veterans understood. Sergeant Rodriguez took a step forward, his expression softening as he studied Sarah's face more carefully. He'd seen that look before, in the mirror during his own dark moments, in the eyes of brothers and sisters who'd struggled with the transition back home. "What's your name, soldier?" he asked gently, using the present tense deliberately. "Sarah Martinez." "Specialist Martinez," she replied, straightening slightly as military protocol kicked in despite her emotional state. "Specialist Martinez," Rodriguez nodded with respect. "What do you need?" The simple question broke through Sarah's defenses. All the shame, fear, and desperation she'd been carrying for months came pouring out in a rush of words. "My son and we were evicted this morning. I can't find stable work because of my PTSD and the medical bills from Tommy's asthma treatments. I'm a veteran, but I feel like I've been forgotten. I served my country, saved lives in Kandahar, but I can't even provide a home for my child." Tommy looked up at his mother with wide eyes, finally, understanding why they'd been carrying their belongings in bags, why she'd been crying when she thought he wasn't looking. The crowd had grown completely silent now. Even the police officers who had started moving toward the scene stopped, recognizing that something profound was happening. Private First Class Jessica Chen, standing in the second row of the formation, felt tears welling up in her eyes. She was barely 21, fresh from her first deployment, and seeing this veteran mother struggling hit her like a punch to the gut. This could be her future, her struggle, if she wasn't careful. "Mom?" Tommy's small voice cut through the tension. "Are we going to be okay?" Before Sarah could answer, Sergeant Rodriguez made a decision that would ripple through the lives of everyone present. He turned to his formation, and in a voice that carried the authority of leadership and the compassion of brotherhood, gave an order that wasn't in any military manual. "Formation, at ease. We have a sister in need." The soldiers relaxed their rigid posture, and several stepped forward. The parade had officially stopped, but something far more important was beginning. "Specialist Martinez," Rodriguez continued, "you're not forgotten. Not today, not ever. We don't leave anyone behind, not on the battlefield and not here at home." What happened next would be remembered by everyone present as one of the most powerful displays of military brotherhood ever witnessed on American soil. Word of the situation had already begun spreading through the parade formations behind them via radio communications, and the response was immediate and overwhelming. Sergeant Rodriguez reached into his dress uniform pocket and pulled out his wallet, removing every bill inside without counting. "This is a start," he said, placing the money in Sarah's trembling hands. "But we're going to do a lot more than this." Private Chen stepped forward next, followed by Corporal James Washington, AIG, 28-year-old father of two who recognized the desperation in Tommy's eyes. Within minutes, soldiers from the entire formation were contributing whatever cash they had on them. The crowd of spectators, moved by what they were witnessing, began reaching into their own pockets and purses. "Ma'am, I'm Colonel Patricia Hayes," said a distinguished woman in dress blues who had walked over from the VIP reviewing stand. "I'm the base commander at Fort Carson. We have programs specifically designed to help veterans in your situation, and I'm personally going to make sure you're connected with every resource available." Sarah could barely speak through her tears. Tommy clung to her side, overwhelmed by the sudden attention, but sensing that these were good people trying to help his mother. A middle-aged man in a business suit pushed through the crowd. "I'm David Chen, Jessica's father," he said. gesturing to the young private. "I own Chen's Electronics downtown. If you're looking for work, I could use someone with your medical background to help with our employee health and safety program. The pay is good, and the hours are flexible for single parents. And I run a property management company," added Maria Gonzalez, a veteran herself who had been watching from the sidewalk. "I have a 2-bedroom apartment that just became available. First month's rent is on me, no questions asked." The scene was being broadcast live on local news stations as reporters had initially come to cover the Veterans Day Parade, but found themselves documenting something far more significant. Viewers across Denver and beyond were calling in, offering help, donations, and support. Tommy tugged on his mother's jacket. "Mom, are all these people really going to help us?" Sarah knelt down to her son's level, tears streaming down her face as she looked into his trusting eyes. "Yes, sweetheart. Yes, they are." Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, no relation to the sergeant, a psychiatrist specializing in veteran mental health, had been watching from the crowd with her own family. She approached Sarah with a business card. "I run a PTSD support group specifically for female veterans. We meet twice a week, and we also help with job placement and life skills. You don't have to fight this battle alone anymore." The Denver VA representative, who had been part of the parade's official delegation, was already on his phone coordinating immediate emergency housing assistance and fast-tracking Sarah's benefit applications that had been stuck in bureaucratic limbo for months. Sergeant Rodriguez, seeing the overwhelming response, made another command decision. He turned to face the crowd and the news cameras that were now broadcasting the scene live across the nation. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying across the street, "this is what service really means. It's not just about wearing the uniform or marching in parades. It's about taking care of each other, especially those who served alongside us and are now fighting different battles at home." The crowd erupted in applause, but Rodriguez wasn't finished. Specialist Martinez served her country with honor in Afghanistan, saving lives as a combat medic. Today, we have the opportunity to serve her. This is what the Veterans Day Parade is really about, not just remembering our service, but continuing to serve each other. Colonel Hayes stepped forward and, in front of hundreds of witnesses and live television cameras, rendered a perfect military salute to Sarah Martinez. "Specialist, your service is recognized, your sacrifice is honored, and your future is secured. Welcome home, soldier." One by one, every service member present followed suit, creating a sea of salutes directed at a single mother who had thought she was invisible and forgotten. 6 months later, the spring Denver sun cast long shadows across the playground at Tommy's new elementary school as Sarah watched her son laugh and play with his classmates. The nightmares still came sometimes, but they were less frequent now, manageable with the help of Dr. Rodriguez's support group and the sense of community she'd found among her fellow veterans. The 2-bedroom apartment Maria Gonzalez had offered had become their true home. Tommy had his own room decorated with his drawings and the model airplanes that several veterans had given him after seeing his story on the news. Sarah's job at Chen's Electronics had grown into a full-time position managing their workplace wellness program, utilizing her medical training in ways that felt meaningful and purposeful. "Mom, look," Tommy called out from the top of the jungle gym. "I'm as tall as the soldiers." Sarah smiled, remembering how small and scared he had looked that November morning when their world seemed to be ending. The transformation in both of them had been remarkable. Tommy was thriving in school, his asthma better controlled now that they had stable housing and consistent health care. More importantly, he had witnessed firsthand the power of community and service, lessons that would shape his character for life. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sergeant Rodriguez. "Hope you're still planning to join us for the unit barbecue this weekend. The guys are excited to see how tall Tommy's gotten." The connection forged that day in the middle of 17th Street had evolved into lasting friendships. The soldiers who had stopped their parade to help her had become an extended family. They checked in regularly, celebrated her victories, and provided support during the difficult moments that were part of her ongoing recovery. Sarah's story had reached far beyond Denver. The video of that November morning had been viewed millions of times online, inspiring similar acts of service and community support for veterans across the country. She'd received letters from fellow veterans sharing their own struggles and thanking her for having the courage to step into that street and ask for help. It wasn't courage, she'd told a reporter during a follow-up interview. It was desperation. But sometimes desperation leads us to exactly where we need to be. The Denver Veterans Day Parade had created a new tradition after that day. Each year, they now included a Service Continues segment where the community comes together to honor veterans not just with applause, but with concrete support for those facing challenges in civilian life. Colonel Hayes had been, true to her word, implementing new programs at Fort Carson to better support transitioning veterans. The No Soldier Left Behind at Home initiative had become a model for military bases nationwide. As Sarah drove home from Tommy's school that afternoon, she passed 17th Street, where it all began. A small plaque had been installed on the sidewalk where she'd stood that day, reading, "In honor of all veterans who continue to serve their communities, and in recognition that the strongest among us are those who ask for help when they need it." She pulled over and stood at the spot for a moment, Tommy's hand in hers. "This is where everything changed for us, isn't it, Mom?" Tommy asked, wise beyond his 9 years now. "Yes, sweetheart. This is where I learned that being brave sometimes means admitting you can't do everything alone. And where all those soldiers became our friends." Sarah squeezed his hand, thinking about the barbecue they'd attend that weekend, about the job that gave her purpose, about the apartment they could actually afford, about the support group that had become her lifeline. That's right, where we learned that family isn't just about blood. Sometimes it's about people who choose to stand with you when you need them most. As they walked back to their car, Tommy looked up at his mother with the same trusting eyes. But now they held something new: security, hope, and the understanding that they were never truly alone. The Veterans Day Parade continued every November, but for the Martinez family, every day had become an opportunity to serve others the way they had been served. Sarah volunteered with organizations helping homeless veterans, and Tommy, inspired by the soldiers who had changed their lives, had announced his intention to join the military himself someday, not just to serve his country, but to continue the chain of service that had saved his family. The story that began with a desperate mother stepping into a street had become a testament to the truth that the strongest military formation is the one that never breaks ranks with those who need help, whether on the battlefield or in the battles of everyday life.